Hello, my name is Chanel Grenaway, and welcome to workshop number 5. These workshops are hosted by the Women's Economic Council, and we're covering um, topics that are highlighted in the What Works Toolkit, which is a guide to help you achieve the 50-30 challenge. I'm happy to be facilitating this conversation today. During the day, I am a racial and gender equity facilitator, and I support leaders and boards on their own journey in terms of embedding and integrating equity practices around the board table and within their organizations. My work is founded on the idea that practice makes progress, the fact that we all need to learn and unlearn and practice and build skills and capacities related to applying equity and inclusion and anti-racism to our work in order to achieve the equity and inclusivity goals we have set out for ourselves. So I encourage you to consider me your coach on your journey as we delve into the various aspects of the What Works Toolkit. I will start this session off with a land acknowledgement and an invitation for you to take a pause moment, maybe to take a few deep breaths before we get into today's topic so that we're grounding our mindset and our energy into the topic. I am joining and recording this call from the city of Markham. I do acknowledge the many different Indigenous peoples that have stewarded this land, that have lived and worked on this land in the past, and those that continue to do so. This is the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, the Anishinaabe, the Seneca, the Chippewa, and the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit peoples. Lately, I've been reflecting on seasons and the fact that seasons are constantly changing, and we adjust to the changing seasons. So this is a picture of Swan Lake Park, which is not too far from my home. Here is another picture of Swan Lake Park at a different season. So one of the things I do love to do is to walk around this park and definitely stop to reflect on what's happening in my life. And sometimes I think about, what season am I in? Am I in a season of growth where I'm learning or unlearning, or where I'm engaging in building my awareness of something new, maybe of a different culture, maybe of a new topic? Sometimes I think about being in a season of maybe care or hibernation, where I'm a little bit more insular. Maybe I'm taking care of myself, my family members, or my friends. Other times I'm in a season of abundance, where my energy is really high. I'm connecting with people. I'm out and about. And I think it's good to reflect on where you're at, both where your energy is at, where your actions lie, like what actions are you doing related to equity? What actions are you doing, related to your relationship building? And maybe you might identify where you're at in terms of seasons. Maybe you might not know where you're at, and that might be your prompt to think about where your energy is going and fill in any gaps in terms of actions that you want to take or things that you want to be doing. So again, just sharing the metaphor of seasons with you today. A quick overview of the agenda. We're going to start by setting the context and kind of looking back at where we've been and then where we're heading today. A big part of where we're heading today is looking at the toolkit and what they have outlined as the leader journey. We're going to be highlighting a few inclusive recruitment and talent processes and best practices in that area. And then at the end, I'll give a sneak peek into the 6th workshop. So again, we've been covering and looking at various parts of the What Works Toolkit. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually share the live version of the toolkit online. as a way of a quick context in terms of what we've covered, and maybe highlight things that you have seen and maybe haven't seen yet in the toolkit. So this is the live page of the toolkit, and basically we've been exploring the different components and, I would say, entry points into their promising practices and resources. So the first session we covered was really all about mapping your journey. And if you click on mapping your journey, it's again one way to get started that highlights your responsibility, your role, and the capacities that you need to build. So again, if you're a board member and maybe you want to look at overall organization planning, you might want to think about compliance as a board. So, you might click down here in terms of policy development, board recruitment, and other related processes. And again, you can go to that resource and it'll provide you with additional promising practices, case studies, and things to consider. So we reviewed the mapping your journey during that first session. The second session, we looked at a different entry point, and this entry point is more on an individual basis. So again, if you don't know where to start and you'd like to get some inspiration, I invite you to check out the 10 Actions You Can Take tool. And when you click on this tool, it highlights the purpose of this tool and then divides up the 10 actions into, I believe, 3 sections. So the first section is learn and reflect. The second section is related to starting the conversation, and the third section is related to make a difference through actions. Again, really great tools in there, more click-through points, more resources, and again, a nice place to start when you need some inspiration. We then dived into starting the conversation tool, which has, I would say, one of the richest areas in terms of resources and frameworks and toolkits. So definitely check this one out if you're looking at developing your skills in terms of holding space for these conversations, facilitating these conversations, creating an environment for brave and safer conversations. There's so much in this toolkit that can help. And then if we go back up here, the fourth session, we looked at the Board and Leader Guidebook. Again, I provided a high-level overview of some areas within the Board and Leader Guidebook. There's so much to cover. We couldn't cover it all in one webinar. So again, I encourage you to explore this area. Again, particularly if you are sitting on a board or if you are a leader within a small, medium, or large organization. And today we are going to be looking, as I mentioned, at the talent processes tool. And again, lots of information in this section to cover. We are going to be focusing in on, again, the leader journey and what promising practices you can try, you can test and pilot related to identifying a leader, related to the recruitment of your leader or leaders on a board. And we're also going to briefly touch upon what training and development and how that impacts retention, what that looks like. There are other resources related to mentorship in this area, as well as succession planning. I won't be able to cover those today just because of time, but again, invite you to take a look at the resources there. So with that, just a few reminders about these sessions. I encourage you to get the most out of this webinar by having a pen and paper handy to take down notes. I also encourage you to participate in real time and try to be as interactive as you can. So when I do stop and ask you a question or to reflect upon a question, I encourage you to do that in real time. There is an accompanying worksheet that goes along with this webinar, so definitely maybe have that worksheet handy. You can also, invite a friend to participate in these workshops, debrief with a friend or colleague on maybe your next step or an action or, one thing that is sparking interest. Maybe, again, have the toolkit also open and nearby so that as I am sharing information, you can quickly turn to the toolkit for more information or stop the video if you want to dive into a particular topic in a more comprehensive way. During these sessions and on my presentation, I will stop every so often to share an example. And when I stop, you'll know that I'm doing so by looking at one of these three icons. So if I stop and you see an icon around leadership and management, that means that I'm sharing an example that's a little bit more closely related to leaders and management or team members. Sometimes I might share an example related to business owners. So that's just an indication that a reflection question or a case study is coming up. I'm going to share this quote. It's by George Box, and I'm sharing it today because, I think throughout these sessions, I have been sharing lots of models and lots of different frameworks as they've been, highlighted in the What Works toolkit. And really what I like about this quote is that it does note that, there's no perfect model, right? So all models are wrong because they're not 100% perfect, but some are useful. And there might be aspects of a model or a framework or a practice that resonates with you. And that's what I want you to focus on. And I want you to think about this work as, again, it's imperfect work, but what can you try? What can you pilot? What can you further ruminate on to advance your work? I'm encouraging you to, hold the model lightly, know that they're not perfect, but try at the same time to find out or to think about, again, what's useful within the practice, within the framework or model that I'm sharing. So essentially, all models are wrong, but some are useful. The first model that I'm actually going to share from the toolkit is what I mentioned previously, their leadership journey. So they've created this sort of map and this roadmap of what a leadership journey might look like for your organization and for your board. It's fairly self-explanatory, and maybe some of these things sound very familiar to you. But it's good to think about your work this way. And as noted in that statement at the bottom, whether you're hiring a new leader or developing your internal talent, it's important that each stage of your process is grounded and embedded with equity and inclusion practices. So it's sometimes, we might start a process and we might do the exact same thing as we did previously. And that's where, again, change isn't going to happen. What I'm inviting you to do is to think about all of these different steps, maybe in a new way, maybe try to do it with fresh eyes and with a lens of equity and inclusion. And by doing that, that's when you can actually start thinking about the changes that you might want to make in terms of the leadership journey. So if we review this model, it outlines that a first starting point is really the identification of the need for a new position, the need for a new board member. So it's that, again, identification that, we need some help here, we need some support here, we need to think about, what does that job description look like? And what needs do we have in our organization that, again, someone can help us fulfill. Then we move on to the recruitment phase, where, again, you're sharing the job description, you're doing some outreach, you're talking to people, and you're, again, doing your best to I would say, cast a broad outreach to many different communities so that you can have a diversity and range of people applying to the position. The third point on the roadmap is mentorship. And it talks about, again, when you bring someone in, what are you doing to orient them to your organization? What are you doing to bring them up to speed in terms of your goals, your mission? So what does that onboarding look like? And maybe what does ongoing mentorship skills development also look like? The toolkit uses the term mentorship, but there's also other terms related to sponsorship that you can also explore in terms of this area of work within the leadership journey. Retention is also impacted by talent and development, right? How are you supporting your leaders, your board members to continue to learn, grow, build their own capacity so that they can actually give back that learning to the organization? So we're going to talk a little bit about what promising practices there are related to training and development, again, from a gender equity lens and a racial equity lens. And the final point on this roadmap is succession planning. So, it is important, particularly in the area of leadership development, board development, that you do build in thinking and planning related to succession, because those are really important key areas of work that have an impact on the overall health of an organization. So definitely intention around succession planning is important. So yeah, again, these 5 steps seem easy enough, but when you're adding an equity lens, that's when things can become a bit challenging. And the real reason that they do become challenging, and as I mentioned before, happens because sometimes we do get stuck and lost maybe in the status quo, in the ways that we've been doing things. Sometimes we might also get stuck in our own biases. And in previous sessions, we've talked a little bit about the challenges that come up, be it with unconscious bias or unexamined bias. We've talked about some leaders, some staff having fear about calling in or calling out microaggressions. We've talked about the complexity of and nuance of this work that we're trying to do. I just wanted to highlight, the fact that yes, unexamined bias is something that we all need to pay attention to and to be aware of as we are thinking about our leadership journey and our talent acquisition. The definition here, bias, again, either explicit or implicit, is really their opinions, preferences, prejudices, inclinations that we have. And again, unconscious or consciously, but we have them. They're formed, again, without reasonable justification. They're ideas and thoughts that actually prevent us from seeing what might be actually in front of us. And what we see is, again, previous thoughts, previous stories, previous stereotypes that we've created, through our varied experience, throughout our lives. There are different types of biases. There's affinity bias, which refers to people's tendency to connect with individuals that are very much like themselves. So again, it's when you look at someone and you can relate to them really quickly because maybe they're dressed like you, maybe they have the same glasses like you, maybe they're the same height as you, and then there's that shared connection instantly. Well, that's an infinity bias. There's confirmation bias, where your preference is that you notice and you accept information that aligns with your current beliefs. So again, in a group of people, and if people are sharing their different perspectives and you hear that, there is a tendency for us naturally to lean in to those that are confirming your own beliefs. There's in-group bias or in-group favoritism, which is a bias where people tend to favor or prefer or uplift the group that they're a member of. So, so similar to affinity bias, but again, a little bit further, it's about favoritism, and it's about, again, leaning into groups based on the fact that you've identified that they're the in-group and that you're a member of. And then the opposite of that is the out-group bias, which is the tendency for people to view people from outside of one's group less unfavorably, or again, in a less preferential way. So again, if someone doesn't fit in your understanding of your group, your tendency is to view them less favorably. So in and of themselves, again, we all have these biases, and I don't think in any situation, or depending on the context, some of these biases can work for you. Sometimes they work against you. There's no right or wrong here. What we need to do is observe the biases when they're showing up. And yes, there are going to be times where the biases are not wanted, not needed, and actually create barriers in terms of whatever goal you're working on or whatever decision you're making. So it is important that we examine the bias, we observe them, and that we, again, shut them down or remove them to the side, particularly during an assessment phase or decision-making phase of a recruitment process. In addition to observing the bias, I think we also have to acknowledge that our working conditions can sometimes make it hard for us to stop and pause and really acknowledge that unexamined bias is showing up. So again, when we're working under stress, it's hard for us to stop and examine those bias. If we're working under significant time constraints, again, biases tend to show up, and because we don't have time to stop, we again fall back into our status quo behaviors. When we're multitasking, and or when we're looking for closure or decision making, again, both of those cases contribute to bias, and they also contribute to our inability to, again, stop and check those biases. So with all this, I'm sharing that it is important that we do build our own practice in terms of observing our bias, in terms of building in structural processes or structural ways where, again, we might not depend on us, our own selves, stopping and observing, but maybe there's structural things that can help us to check our biases, and that might be, working with a peer or a partner. It might be creating a system using technology that's, again, pointing out biases. So it is really important to, again, looking at whatever phase of a recruitment process that you're involved in, looking at it from that equity lens, looking at it from a place of, okay, where does bias show up and how can we mitigate it? So with that idea and, the importance of embedding equity in all that you do, I'm going to ask you to take a moment now to pause and to think about these two questions. The first one: how might you stop and examine biases in your outreach, recruitment, retention, or succession planning processes? So again, you might want to think about those processes, and maybe there are milestone points in those processes that, again, you can add a little bit of a pause or a little bit of a meeting or connection point with your counterparts, your peers, or your committee to have a conversation about unexamined biases that might be showing up. So I'll give you a minute to think about that one. The second question: affinity bias often exists in the recruitment process, where decision makers tend to connect with employees who are similar to themselves. How might you or how will you mitigate affinity bias? So again, this is a more, a little bit of a scenario question which enables you to think about affinity bias and how that might show up in the recruitment process. So yes, I encourage you to take a minute to answer these 2 questions, jot some ideas down, or connect with a peer on these. And then we'll continue on the next slide. Okay, so the first area on the leadership journey, you'll recall, was the identification of a leader. So again, this is the point where, maybe a manager comes to you, maybe a vice president, or maybe the board chair comes to you, or the governance committee comes to you, and you realize that you need some additional support. This is your first opportunity to think about, again, how are you going to apply an equity lens to this work? So it's really important to be intentional about when and how, in your identification of a leader, that you are thinking about equity priorities. Leadership, again, is so important. It sets the tone for your culture. It can, leaders contribute to making places more inclusive and more equitable. So you're really going to want to apply an equity lens to your process. So what do those strategic decisions look like? When you're talking about understanding your needs in terms of talent, in terms of experience, I think there's lots of equity-based questions that you can ask. Definitely having those conversations is really important, but also when you're having those conversations, it's again really important to stop and correct any dialogue that does go into the direction of biases or tokenism, or anything that sounds kind of like, oh, this is the status quo, we're going to do things the exact same way. So beware of, again, deadlines that might encourage you to do things the same way. Beware of, just refreshing a document versus actually revising a document, right? So it's not just about changing the date, maybe, looking at a few lines. I really encourage you to make this a full pause and stop moment, a full moment to refresh a job description, or to refresh again, have that strategic conversation about, what is it that you need in terms of a leader in your organization at this time. So again, reflect on where underrepresentation lies within your organization. Draw upon any data that you might have related to demographics. And likewise, you want to be clear about the skills, competencies, experiences that you want to bring into your organization. When it does come time to prepare job descriptions and the employment postings, again, within the toolkit, there's lots of different resources and promising practices highlighted there. I have selected 4 critical practices that I'm going to speak about today. But again, don't stop with these 4. Explore the toolkit and other resources, because there's so much that can be done in terms of reviewing a job description from a gender equity lens. The first point that I have here as a critical practice is to ensure that your organization's commitment and value to equity, diversity, and inclusion is visible. How can you make it visible in the job description that you are committed to doing better, to being an inclusive employer? Do you have a statement that you can include? Do you have an action plan? What is it, again, in your value statement, maybe in your mission and vision, that again is linked to your commitment and value related to equity, diversity, and inclusion. You might also want to align the desired candidate qualifications and experiences to only those necessary to complete the responsibilities for the role. So again, sometimes you want to include everything in a job description. And sometimes really there's no one person that has everything in terms of experiences and qualifications. So, it's often suggested that, you start drafting the job description. And yes, maybe you start with a big list, but then you review it and you say, okay, this is, what's really needed. It might be too much. What is really needed? What are those absolutely necessary pieces that are needed to fulfill this leadership role or this role on the board? I think we all know that there's no perfect person. So you don't want to discourage people from applying to your job based on, too much information or unrealistic expectations. So that's all related to point number 2. The third point there is be mindful of language used. And again, we've talked about language previously when we were speaking about starting the conversation or actioning the conversation. The same thing is true of a job description, because it's your way of really communicating your needs. So you are going to want to be mindful and intentional about the words that you use. So, have someone review the job description and remove any gender-coded words from descriptions. You want to keep the language simple, accessible, and inviting. Again, the toolkit has lots of additional resources and examples of ways that you can keep the language inclusive. And the fourth one is a little bit more specific and granular. It's the example of, if possible, and it really is now becoming almost expected and a standard that if it is for a job, for a leadership position, that you explicitly state the salary expectations or ranges that you're able to offer. This helps to avoid any discrepancies, in terms of the candidate's understanding of the expectations. It helps for fair negotiations. It helps also, again, in terms of gender parity, because we often know that if the job range isn't there, there are different negotiation styles and techniques for men, women, and gender diverse people. So again, to start everyone on a more equal playing field, noting what the salary is that you're able to offer is important upfront, and or to include that salary range. So again, these are just 4 tips. There's lots more in the toolkit, but I think these 4, can get you started in terms of a review or refresh of your job descriptions. Related to job descriptions is the idea of job postings, and where are you going to be doing your outreach? Where are you going to be, again, letting people know that you're hiring? So I've highlighted 4 promising practices related to that outreach component of this work. And so the first one there is, promote accessibility by posting in various channels. So don't just, again, post on your website. Try to find a diversity of platforms, places, spaces where people can access and learn about the job posting. I would say if it is, again, on your website or in any other space, you're going to want to think about posting it in a way that, again, it's accessible. So there are lots of technical tools that are available that make, again, using the computer, reading the text accessible. So just think about that. Have you added those tools to your website? And if you're sharing it with others on other sites, have they also added those tools, again, to increase and promote accessibility? Definitely conduct outreach to priority groups based on the needs that you've identified within your organization. So again, if in your job description you say that you are committed to hiring from traditionally excluded groups such as Black, First Nations, Métis, Inuit, people with disabilities, women, racialized groups, and any gender diverse communities, whatever list that you have there of equity denied groups. It's also important to get your job ad again in places and spaces where those groups often go to look for the information. So you might want to, again, post the job in specific community newspapers, specific community online newsletters, or job boards, or maybe there's an organization that serves that community. Again, asking them to post the job could also help with the outreach and the expansion of your outreach areas. And the last one there is another way is to attend or contribute to events from community-based organizations and share the opportunity that way. So really, once a job ad is out, I would encourage you to, again, when you're attending a diversity of events, alert people to the ad. If you're connecting with community members, community agencies where you already have a good relationship, again, alert them, let them know that you're hiring. Word of mouth is really great, and particularly if you have existing relationships with community-based organizations. Now, if you don't have those relationships, that's again sort of another area in terms of growth that you can build. If you recognize you need to build relationships, well then, yeah, start with that relationship building. So the next time you have a job ad, you can easily let them know that an opportunity is available. So we're going to pause here for a moment, and I'll invite you to consider this scenario and to maybe jot down a few ideas in terms of what might you do. This is, again, now looking at this from a board member perspective. So as a member of the board of your organization, you have been selected to support the recruitment process for a new board member. You've been asked to review the initial volunteer posting and description. What should you look out for to ensure the description is equitable and inclusive? What can you do to ensure the organization goes beyond just sharing the role on your organization's website? So the examples that I shared were really more about organizations hiring for a leader. This is an example about a board member hiring, or a board committee hiring for a new board member. There are, some differences, but a lot of things that are the same. And I think overall, the practices that I've shared are the same. There are, again, some nuances. Obviously, it's a volunteer position in most cases. There might be, again, criteria differences related to recruitment for a board member. But yeah, I encourage you to take a few minutes to answer this question, maybe building on some of the promising practices that were shared, and or thinking about the nuances related to recruiting for a board member. Okay, so in the toolkit, they actually shared this case study from Scotiabank. So I thought I would also share it here because it's an interesting case study that highlights how things can be done different. So now this is again looking at, again, a corporation that does lots of hiring. And the case study highlighted that Scotiabank recognized the need to remove barriers from its talent acquisition process, specifically related to applicant screening. So the organization made a decision to remove resumes entirely from its process, and they piloted this initiative within one area of their work. And I think it was noted the digital factory team. So Scotiabank decided to partner with Plum, which is a talent assessment platform that measures a candidate's personality, social intelligence, and problem-solving capabilities. So candidates were invited to answer some questions on using this talent assessment platform. And based on the information that they put in there, the candidates received a match score, which identified all of their roles within the digital factory team at Scotiabank that they would be or that they might be suitable to apply for. So again, they got rid of the resumes, got rid of everything, all the biases that can actually happen when you actually receive a resume and a cover letter. And they invited candidates to fill out this information, put everything that everything about you related to, again, it was focused on personality, social intelligence, and problem solving. And they being the technology, would identify areas within this team that they have the skills for, that there was a match. So as a result of this initiative, Scotiabank saw a 60% increase in Black, Indigenous, and racialized people applying for their jobs. So that's huge, right? Within this pilot, they also noted a 50% increase of women within this particular hiring cohort. So it does make a difference, right? I think, again, when people see a job ad, we go through our own assessment. Do we have the skills for this? Do we not have the skills for this? And a lot of that can be influenced, again, by our backgrounds, our education, our knowledge of, the industry. So flipping it around and having technology sort of do that assessment for us can actually help. And I'm not saying technology is the answer to everything, nor am I saying technology is perfect. But in this case, it actually did support what Scotiabank wanted, which was they wanted more applicants applying to their jobs, more and diversity of applicants applying. And so that it worked for them in this case. So again, something to consider. And hopefully a little bit of inspiration in terms of what happens when you do things differently. Okay, so continuing back on the leadership journey, once you've identified the leader, once you've recruited for the position, and the next step is really related to screening out the applications or screening in applications, and then the additional application process of interviewing. So interviewing, again, really important part of the process. It's the opportunity to get to know your candidates. So I'm highlighting 4 pieces here regarding how you can ensure or better ensure that you're interviewing with equity at the center. So the first one is really related to the awareness of our unconscious bias and how that shows up time and time again. So what can you do to help those that are part of the interview process to observe their bias, right? What can we do to minimize bias? So one of the things suggested is that, again, we provide our staff with training on unconscious bias, that we maybe take time to discuss and share personal biases that might turn up in the recruitment process or that have turned up, and that we track how we're doing in terms of our screening, our decision-making within the recruitment process. Because if you start to see patterns, that's when you can start to ask questions, and that's when you can start to realize, what are the barriers and what needs to change. It's also important that when you do conduct interviews, that it's not just an interview with one person, that sometimes it can be beneficial to have 2 or 3 people involved in the interview, because that helps to prevent personal biases that show up. The third point there, ensure that the hiring panels also consist of diverse interviewers. So again, where possible, if you do have a panel of 3, what diversity is on that panel? And it doesn't always or necessarily have to be a diversity of race or gender solely. It could be age, it could be people working in different departments, it could be experience. There's so many. I would say consider all the areas of diversity that we have as individuals, and consider those as you're putting together the hiring team. And the last point there, where possible, adopt a standardized interview process for each role. So really think about and be intentional about the interview questions, the duration of the interview, the scoring card and the screening process. Again, being intentional about those, keeping them fair and consistent also helps to make the process more equitable. I would say the toolkit also strongly encourages leaders to think about how they can make the experience for the candidate as enjoyable as it can be. So, we all know interviews are nerve-wracking. They can be nerve-wracking for some because, a lot might be riding on an interview, right? Jobs are a big part of our livelihoods. So how can we make it a little less anxiety-ridden for the candidates? Because at the end of the day, I think we all want to see and hear the best from the candidate. We all want the candidate to do a great job. We all want to find, a person that's going to add to the workforce, add to the board table, in a unique way and in the best way that they can. So yeah, think about yourself as, how can I set this person up for success? So that might be, creating a interview success guide, and maybe sharing some of the interview questions with the candidates so that they can prepare. It might be asking the candidates at multiple points in time, do you need any accommodations? And be open to whatever they say, and be open to changing things up so that they can feel a little bit more comfortable, or they can participate fully in the interview process. I think how you show up for the interview is also very important, because you are setting the energy, you're setting the tone for the interview. So also think about how you're showing up, and again, how you're modeling and representing the mission and vision of your organization, as well as your demonstration of your commitment to equity and inclusion. Because candidates are looking at that, right? They're looking at, how are you making me feel? What questions are you asking? They're looking to get insight into the culture of the organization. So again, you and your team are going to be wanting to also put your best display of that forward. Okay, so now we're going to, again, pause and take a moment for you to think about the interview and maybe the applicant screening process. I have 2 questions here for you to consider. First one, what can you do to mitigate bias throughout the applicant screening and interview process? And number 2, what would you include in an interview success guide? So again, if you're preparing to interview either for a board position and or for a leadership position in your organization, what information might you want to share with a candidate? Might you want to include, again, to ensure that they, come to the interview as best prepared as they can? And again, as a way of demonstrating your commitment to equity as well. Okay, I'll leave you to answer those 2 questions. Okay, so the third area that I wanted to cover today regarding the leadership journey is the idea of training and development, and how training and development is really a tool for retention. Retention, is so important within our organizations and our boards, particularly when, we have wonderful talent that is contributing to the culture, contributing to the organization's mission. You really want to keep those people for as long as you can, so that they continue to create that impact. And training and investing in your board members, or investing in your leaders, is one way of doing that. And so again, I've highlighted 4 areas or 4 actions that you can consider as you're thinking about maybe a training and development plan or a learning agenda for your team. So definitely you are, encouraged to establish a professional development program in collaboration with your leaders and board members. So, try not to do this in isolation, but try to invite them in, try to figure out, what do they want to learn, what projects are coming up and what skills gaps exist. And again, how can you support them to minimize those skills gaps, and be, again, intentional about it, put a plan around it, put resource around it, put time and energy around it. It's also important as a leader, both on a board and in an organization, to promote and demonstrate a culture of continuous learning and development. And this might mean, again, talking about your own learning journey and what that looked like. It could be highlighting different learning opportunities, internal opportunities and external opportunities. In today's day and age, I always say there's no shortage of ways for us to learn, right? And free ways. So not everything costs money, right? Is it encouraging members to attend a webinar, to listen to a podcast, to read a book, to read an article? So whatever you're doing to encourage that ongoing learning and that this is a learning environment can go, again, a long way in terms of investing in the interest of your employees and or your board members. Think about providing training that meets the unique identities of different leaders. So I would say, again, because of the variety of people around your board table or people in leadership positions, you should also think about their learning styles, their wisdom, and where they want to, again, sort of grow in terms of their capacities. You're also going to want to think about the various options, right, in terms of where they're getting their learning from. So it doesn't necessarily have to be from a particular academic institution or a particular industry rated or industry standard platform. Maybe there's something international that this person is interested in that is comparable to a course that they would take here. Maybe there is something that's, again, not directly aligned to the work that you do, but is close enough aligned, but maybe from a different sector or maybe from a different geographic location, that again can be used as a skill building opportunity. So again, it's about thinking broadly and co-designing it with your leaders or board members. That last point again sort of emphasizes the point that there's so many different ways of learning, and to keep that in mind, keep the unique learning styles and preferences of leaders top of mind. So again, someone might be more inclined to participate in a lecture. There might be someone who's technologically savvy, and there's maybe some sort of gamification opportunity that they'd like to participate in. I would say, again, be open to a variety of learning platforms and be open to a co-design process with your leaders and your board members. We've covered 3 of the 5 points on the leadership journey. I do encourage you to go back to the What Works toolkit to look up what they have in terms of resources related to mentorship and what they have noted around succession planning. I've also listed a few other additional resources here, which, again, if I had time to talk about, and if we had all day and all the time in the world, I would, point out these pieces. So I encourage you to look at some of these additional resources. Some are, shorter tip sheets. Some are really great frameworks, and some are sort of promising practices listed out in a blog. So do take time, depending on where you're at in your recruitment journey, in your leadership journey, and what you're working on. The toolkit is going to be available for you to interact with as needed, as you need to do it. So do continue to return to it and engage with it. So finally, again, I'm reminding you that there is a worksheet that goes along with this session, and these 4 questions are at the end of this or are included in the worksheet. So to help you move from just learning and reflecting, if you fill out this worksheet, you then start to move into accountability and action. So, what is that one next step that you can do? What other resources might you visit in the toolkit? What's the one thing that you're thinking about after participating in this webinar? If you answer these questions, it'll just help you and nudge you a little bit forward to that next step of action. And we're now moving on to the final workshop, which is workshop number 6, where we'll be exploring sustainable organizational change. And again, this is another component within the toolkit. So we'll be looking at the importance of embedding equity practices in your daily work. We're going to be looking at some promising practices related to fostering the idea of change and ongoing change within an organization. And finally, we're going to be looking at accountability practices and behaviors. So I do, again, thank you for taking the time today to participate in this workshop and this webinar. Again, hope this sparked some inspiration and some thought regarding your leadership journey and your process in terms of attracting new board members and new leaders to your organization. Thanks again for joining, and I hope to see you in the session number 6.